The Navy SEAL stepped directly into Mike Tyson's path, chest puffed, jaw set, and laughed straight into the heavyweight champion's face while calling him a manufactured killer. Tyson's eyes went flat, his shoulders dropped into that signature crouch, and every person in the room felt the oxygen get sucked out like a grenade had just lost its pin. What happened in the next 90 seconds would become underground legend, a story whispered about for decades in both military barracks and boxing gyms around the world. The SEAL grabbed Mike Tyson by the collar of his shirt and shoved him backward into a table full of drinks. Glasses shattered across the floor, and every single person in that very important person section froze mid-sentence. What happened in the next 45 minutes would become Las Vegas legend, a story whispered about for decades by bouncers, fighters, and military guys who swear they were there that night, but most of them weren't. Let me take you back. It's 1998. Tyson is 2 years removed from biting Evander Holyfield's ear off on live television. He's banned from boxing. His license is revoked. He's got nothing but rage and too much time and a reputation that makes grown men cross the street when they see him coming. And on this particular night, he's sitting in a corner booth at a high-end club on the Strip, the kind of place where the bottles come with sparklers and the cover charge is more than most people's rent. He's not looking for trouble. That's the part people always get wrong. Tyson wasn't prowling. He was drinking cranberry juice because he was trying to stay clean at the time. He had 2 guys with him, not security, just friends. He was laughing about something, leaned back, relaxed for maybe the first time in weeks. Now here's where the night turns. A group of 6 guys walk in, military. You could tell even without the haircuts, the way they moved through the crowd, shoulder to shoulder, scanning the room before they sat down. These weren't weekend warriors, these were operators, Navy SEALs fresh off a deployment, blowing off steam the way those guys do, which means drinking hard and talking loud. Most of them were big, not bodybuilder big, functional big, thick necks, forearms that looked carved from rope and callus. The kind of guys who run 10 miles before breakfast carrying another man on their backs. Believe me when I tell you, in any normal room, these are the most dangerous men present. They know it. Everyone around them knows it. And that confidence, that earned swagger, that's what set the whole thing off. The leader of the group, we'll call him Davis because his real name has never been confirmed, and the guys who were actually there protect it. To this day, Davis was about 6'2", 230 pounds crew cut, so tight his scalp was shiny, jaw like a cinder block. He had a scar running from his left ear down to the base of his neck, and nobody was stupid enough to ask where it came from. He'd done 4 combat deployments. He'd been in firefights most people couldn't imagine. And he had this belief that he carried everywhere, this absolute certainty that a trained special operations fighter could take any man alive in a real fight, because combat was the only arena that mattered. He spotted Tyson from across the room. Davis didn't whisper about it. He pointed. He pointed directly at Mike Tyson sitting in that booth, and he said something to his crew that made all 6 of them turn and stare. Tyson noticed. Of course he noticed. The man spent his entire life being watched by people who either wanted his autograph or wanted to test him. He could feel the difference the way a dog can tell if you're afraid. He clocked the group. He registered them. Then he went back to his cranberry juice. But Davis wasn't done. He stood up from his table, he grabbed his beer, and he walked straight toward Mike Tyson's booth with the kind of walk that announces itself. Not stumbling drunk, just deliberate. Every step saying, "I'm coming over there and I don't care who you are." Tyson's 2 friends saw it first. One of them put his hand flat on the table, the universal signal for stay cool. The other shifted in his seat to create space. They'd been around Tyson long enough to know what happens when someone approaches like that. Davis stopped about 3 feet from the booth. He took a sip of his beer. He looked down at Tyson, who was still seated, and he said, "So you're the baddest man on the planet, huh?" Tyson didn't look up right away. He traced his finger along the rim of his glass. Then, slowly, he lifted his eyes. "I'm just having a drink, man." Davis laughed. Not a polite laugh, a dismissive one, the kind of laugh designed to make you feel small. He turned to his boys, who were watching from their table, and he said loud enough for half the very important person to hear, "This is the guy who bit someone's ear because he was losing. This is the toughest boxer alive." He turned back to Tyson. "Boxing. That's cute. Why don't you try fighting a real man sometime?" Get this. The room didn't go quiet because most people couldn't hear what was being said. The music was still thumping, cocktail waitresses were still moving. But the people close enough to hear, about a dozen of them, every single one stopped what they were doing, because they understood what they were watching. They were watching a fuse burn. Tyson's jaw tightened. His hand moved off the glass and dropped below the table, resting on his thigh. If you knew anything about him, you knew that was a bad sign. That was the hand getting ready. That was muscle memory from 1,000 fights, half of them in the ring and the other half in places just like this one. "You should go back to your table," Tyson said. His voice was quiet, higher pitched than you'd expect, which always threw people off. That soft voice coming from that thick body, that tattooed face, those fists that had put men in hospitals. Davis didn't move. "What are you going to do about it?" Davis said. "Hit me? Go ahead. Take a swing at someone who actually knows how to fight, not some guy in shorts following rules." Here's what nobody tells you about that moment. There were actually 2 bouncers moving toward the situation already. Big guys, both over 6'4". They'd been tracking Davis since he left his table, but they were still 15 feet away, weaving through the crowd. And in a room like that, 15 feet might as well be 15 miles. Tyson stood up. When Mike Tyson stands up, there's this thing that happens. He's only 5'10". He's shorter than almost everyone expects. But the width of him, the density, the way his shoulders fill a space, it changes the geometry of a room. You realize very quickly that height has nothing to do with what's about to happen to you. Davis didn't step back. Credit to him or blame, the man held his ground. His SEAL training kept his feet planted. He even puffed up a little, squaring his shoulders, lifting his chin. 2 predators standing 3 feet apart in a room full of people who suddenly wanted to be somewhere else. "Sit down," Davis said. "I'm not scared of a boxer." Tyson cocked his head slightly to the left. That signature Tyson look, eyes locked, face blank, no anger visible on the surface anymore. And that was the terrifying part, because anyone who'd followed his career knew that Mike Tyson at his most dangerous wasn't the screaming Tyson, the press conference Tyson, the biting Tyson. The most dangerous Tyson was the quiet one, the one who'd gone somewhere behind his own eyes where mathematics replaced emotion, where he was calculating distance, timing, angle, where he was seeing the punch before he threw it. And that's when Davis made his mistake. He reached out and grabbed the collar of Tyson's shirt. Not a punch, not a takedown attempt, a grab, the kind of move a guy makes when he wants to establish dominance without technically throwing the first blow. He yanked Tyson forward and in the same motion shoved him sideways into the table. I swear this happened exactly the way I'm telling you. Glasses exploded off the table. Cranberry juice splashed across the white leather booth. Tyson stumbled back half a step, caught his balance on the edge of the seat, and in that fraction of a second, something clicked behind his eyes. The leash snapped. Davis was already bringing his right hand up, probably going for some kind of clinch or control position the way they train you in combatives. But he was operating on military time. Tyson was operating on Brownsville time. And in Brownsville, when someone puts hands on you, you don't clinch, you don't control, you end it. Tyson's left hook came from somewhere below the table line. It traveled maybe 14 inches. It was the shortest, most compact punch most people in that room had ever seen, and none of them truly saw it. They saw the start and they saw the finish. The middle was just a blur, a skip in reality, a moment where physics did something cruel. Caught Davis on the right side of his jaw, just below the ear. And this is a man who'd been punched before. This is a man who'd done hand-to-hand combat training for years, who'd been in bar fights on 3 different continents, who'd taken shots that would drop a normal civilian. None of that mattered. Davis's head snapped sideways so fast his whole body followed. His legs went in 2 different directions. His beer bottle flew out of his hand and shattered against the wall 6 feet away. And then he was on the ground, just like that. Standing 1 second, horizontal the next, with a sound when he hit the floor that people described later as heavy, like something important had been switched off. Now mark this. That was 1 punch. 1. From a standing position with no wind-up, no room to load, no proper stance. Tyson hit him from basically a flat-footed position after being shoved into a table, and Davis went down so hard his friends at the other table stood up in unison, chairs scraping. faces changing from amused to alarmed in about a half second. But here's where the story goes somewhere nobody expected. Tyson didn't follow up. In the ring, Prime Tyson would have swarmed. He would have been on top of Davis throwing hammer shots before the man's back even touched the canvas. That was the Tyson the world knew, the finisher, the guy who didn't let you recover. This Tyson stopped. He stood over Davis, fists still clenched, breathing hard through his nose, and he looked down at this unconscious Navy SEAL the way you'd look at a flat tire. Not with triumph, not with rage, with something closer to exhaustion. The exhaustion of a man who had been dealing with this exact scenario for 15 years and was so tired of it he could barely stand. Davis's crew was up now, all 5 of them. And this is where it could have become a war. 5 trained special operators against Mike Tyson in a Las Vegas nightclub. The math alone should have terrified anyone watching. These men had been trained to fight in teams. They were conditioned to respond to a fallen teammate with overwhelming force. And for about 3 seconds, it looked like that's exactly what was going to happen. The biggest one, a guy who had at least 4 inches and 30 pounds on Tyson, took 2 steps forward. His hands were up, not in fists, but in that open palm combat-ready position they drill into you in military close-quarters training. Trust me on this, the next 10 seconds decided everything. Tyson turned to face them, all 5 of them. He didn't back up, he didn't raise his hands. He just turned, feet shoulder-width apart, and looked at them with an expression that said something very simple, something that needed no words. Something that every man in that group, despite all their training, despite all their deployments, despite every fight they'd ever won, understood on a cellular level. The big one stopped. He stopped the way you stop when you're walking through the woods and you see a snake on the trail in front of you. Not in fear exactly, in recognition. In the sudden understanding that the next step you take might be the worst decision of your life. One of the other SEALs, a shorter guy, stockier, with a thick beard, grabbed his buddy's arm and pulled him back. He said something nobody in the crowd could hear, but whatever he said, it worked. The big one lowered his hands. He took a step back, then another. The bouncers finally arrived. 2 of them flanked Tyson, not aggressively, just positioning. A third knelt down next to Davis, who was starting to blink, his eyes unfocused, his mouth open, drool and blood mixing on his chin. And here's the part that became legend. Here's the part that gets repeated in quiet voices, in back rooms and gyms and military bars, from San Diego to Virginia Beach. Tyson looked down at Davis. He watched this man who had grabbed him, who had insulted him, who had called him fake, who had shoved him into a table, and he knelt down. Mike Tyson knelt down next to the man who had just tried to humiliate him. He put one hand on Davis's shoulder, gently, and in that voice, that high, soft, almost childlike voice, he said, "Hey, you all right, man? Can you hear me?" Davis's eyes focused. He blinked. He saw Tyson's face about 12 inches from his own, and he flinched, his hand coming up instinctively. Tyson didn't move, didn't pull back, just stayed there, one knee on the ground, hand on the man's shoulder. "Easy," Tyson said. "It's done. You're okay." No kidding. The man who'd just been knocked into next week by the hardest hitter in boxing history was being comforted by the same guy who put him there. And Tyson wasn't doing it for cameras. There were no cameras. This was 1998. Nobody had phones recording. This was just a man making a choice about who he wanted to be in that moment. Davis sat up slowly. One of his guys finally came over and helped prop him up against the base of the booth. Davis touched his jaw, winced, and looked at Tyson with an expression that had changed completely. The arrogance was gone. The mockery was gone. Something else had replaced it. Not fear. Something deeper than fear. Understanding. The kind of understanding you can only get from experiencing something firsthand that you previously thought was exaggerated. "I had no idea," Davis said. His words were slightly slurred, jaw already swelling. "I had no idea anything could hit that hard." Tyson just looked at him. "I didn't want to do that," Tyson said. "I don't want to do that anymore." And right there, in that sentence, you heard something nobody outside Tyson's inner circle got to hear very often. You heard the cost. You heard what it does to a man to be the most feared person in any room he walks into for 2 straight decades. You heard the weight of every fight, every threat, every time someone walked up to him in a restaurant or a club or a gas station and tried to prove something. Tyson didn't enjoy it. He carried it the way a man carries a scar. It was part of him, but it wasn't a part he chose. Davis's bearded friend stepped forward. He looked at Tyson and extended his hand. "I apologize for my boy," he said. "He drinks and gets stupid. That's on us. We should have stopped him." Tyson stood up, took the man's hand and shook it. One firm shake, no performance, no ego. Then he turned to the bouncers and said, "We're good here. Nobody needs to go anywhere." Now here's the thing. The bouncers were ready to throw the whole SEAL team out. They were ready to call LVMPD. There were protocols for this kind of thing in high-end Vegas clubs, and those protocols usually ended with somebody in the back of a police car. But Tyson waved it off. He told the bouncers these guys were fine. He told them it was a misunderstanding. You hearing this right. The guy who got assaulted was protecting the guys who assaulted him. The manager came over. Slick guy in a black suit, clearly nervous because having an incident involving Mike Tyson in your club was the kind of thing that either made you famous or got you shut down, and there wasn't much middle ground. Tyson told the manager to send a round to the SEAL's table. On him. The manager's face did something complicated, like his brain was trying to process a reality that didn't match any scenario he'd prepared for. But he nodded, flagged a waitress, and the drinks went over. The SEALs sat back down at their table. Davis was upright now, sitting in a chair, holding a napkin full of ice against his jaw. He kept shaking his head slowly, not in anger, in disbelief. The kind of disbelief that comes from having your entire worldview restructured in about 1.5 seconds. For real, though, think about what Davis believed walking into that club. He believed boxing was a sport, a controlled, regulated, limited contest that didn't translate to real combat. He believed that his training, his experience in actual warfare, his ability to fight dirty, to use elbows and knees and chokes and everything a ring doesn't allow, made him superior to any man who fought within rules. And in theory, that's not a crazy thing to believe. A lot of people believe it. There are entire martial arts built on the premise that sport fighting is inferior to combat fighting. But theory has a way of dying real quick when it meets a left hook from Mike Tyson. What Davis didn't understand, what nobody understands until they're in it, is that the level of violence Tyson carried wasn't about boxing. It wasn't about rules or sport. Tyson grew up in Brownsville, Brooklyn. He was fighting grown men when he was 12 years old. Not sparring, fighting, on the street, for survival. By the time Customato got hold of him and channeled all that raw destruction into technique, Tyson wasn't learning to fight. He was learning to organize a violence that was already inside him. Boxing didn't make Tyson dangerous. Boxing made Tyson precise. And precision at that level, speed at that level, power at that level, it doesn't care about your background. It doesn't care about your training. It doesn't care about your deployments or your combat record or how many men you've beaten in hand-to-hand drills. When a fist moving at that velocity connects with your jaw, your brain bounces off the inside of your skull and the lights go out. That's not boxing. That's physics. And physics is undefeated. About 20 minutes later, something happened that turned this from a fight story into something else entirely. Davis got up from his table. He crossed the room. He walked right back to Tyson's booth. And every person who had seen what happened earlier held their breath. The bouncers moved. Tyson's friends shifted, but Davis held up both hands, palms out, the universal gesture of, "I come in peace." He stood in front of Tyson's booth, and he said, "Can I sit down?" Tyson looked at him for a long moment. Then he slid over and made room. Davis sat down across from Mike Tyson, the man who had grabbed him by the collar, insulted his career, called his fighting fake, and gotten knocked unconscious for it, sat down and started talking to him. And this is the detail, this is the thing that makes this story more than just a knockout video. Tyson talked back. They talked for over an hour. Nobody at nearby tables could hear everything, but pieces of the conversation drifted out. Davis talked about what it was like overseas, the things he'd seen, the decisions he'd made that he couldn't undo, and Tyson talked about his childhood, the group homes, the bullying, the first time he ever hit someone so hard they didn't get up and how it scared him because he was 11 years old and he thought he'd killed someone. Two men who the world defined by their capacity for violence sat in a Las Vegas booth and talked about the things violence had cost them. Not the victories, the cost. Here's what people miss about that whole night. Davis didn't walk into that club and pick a fight with Tyson because he was a bad guy. He picked that fight because his entire identity was built on being the most capable fighter in any room. And when he saw Mike Tyson sitting there, that identity felt threatened. He didn't see a human being in that booth. He saw a challenge. He saw a test he needed to pass to keep believing his own story about himself. And when Tyson put him on the floor in one punch, that story collapsed. What was left underneath, the real Davis, the one without the armor of invincibility, that guy was actually decent. He was actually humble. He just needed to get knocked out to find that part of himself again. And Tyson knew that. Because Tyson had been that guy. He'd been the one who walked into rooms thinking he had to prove something. He'd been the one who defined himself by his ability to destroy. He'd spent a decade doing exactly what Davis did, just on a bigger stage with more cameras. And it almost killed him. So when he knelt down next to a man he'd just knocked unconscious and asked him if he was okay, he wasn't being noble. He was recognizing himself. Listen to me. This is important. The story that got passed around in the years after was simple. Navy SEAL talked trash to Tyson. Tyson knocked him out cold. That's the version you hear in gyms. That's the version that ends up on internet lists of people who messed with the wrong person. But that version is incomplete. That version leaves out the best part. It leaves out the hour-long conversation. It leaves out the handshake at the end of the night. It leaves out what one of the other SEALs said as they were leaving the club. The bearded one, the one who'd apologized, stopped at Tyson's booth on the way out. Davis was already outside, walking gingerly, jaw swollen, pride recalibrated. The bearded SEAL looked at Tyson and said, "He's not going to stop talking about this for the rest of his life." Tyson took a sip of a fresh cranberry juice and said, "Tell him I said he's tough." He took a good one. The SEAL nodded. "For what it's worth, he is tough. I've seen him take hits that would flatten most people." "I'm not most people," Tyson said. "Not bragging. Just stating a fact the way you'd say the sky is blue." The SEAL almost laughed, caught himself, nodded again. Then he left. Now if you've made it this far in this story, you already know this isn't just about a punch. This isn't just about Tyson's power or a SEAL's overconfidence. This is about the thing that happens when two dangerous men collide, and one of them chooses to be more than what the world expects. Because the world expected Tyson to be a monster. That was the narrative. The youngest heavyweight champion in history. The ear-biter. The convicted felon. The man who told Lennox Lewis he wanted to eat his children. The media painted Tyson as a creature, something barely contained, something that should be kept behind glass and observed from a distance. And some of that was his own doing. He fed the mythology because it served him in the ring. Fear was his greatest weapon before he ever threw a punch. But in that booth, in that club, on that night, Tyson chose something different. He could have let Davis lie on the ground. He could have walked away. He could have let the bouncers handle it and gone home feeling justified. Instead, he knelt down and asked a man if he was okay. Instead, he bought drinks for the table of guys who came with the man who attacked him. Instead, he sat for an hour and traded war stories with someone who had tried to humiliate him in public. That's not the behavior of a monster. That's the behavior of a man who fought hard to become something better than what life tried to make him. And Davis. I want to give credit where credit is due. That man took a flush left hook from Mike Tyson, one of the 5 hardest punchers who ever lived, and 20 minutes later he walked back across the room and sat down. That takes something. Call it courage, call it humility, call it the same kind of stubbornness that gets you through buds, training, whatever it is. Most men don't have it. Most men, after getting embarrassed like that, they leave. They go home. They bury the story. They never tell anyone. Not Davis. Davis sat down across from the man who flatlined him and said, "Teach me something." You want to know the real ending of this story? The part that became legend? It wasn't the punch. Everyone remembers the punch. But the punch isn't what people whisper about. What they whisper about is what happened in the parking lot. When the club closed, Tyson walked out with his 2 friends. The parking lot was mostly empty. Valets were moving cars. The desert air had that dry bite it gets after midnight when the heat finally lets go, and standing next to a black SUV, waiting, was Davis. Alone. His crew was already inside the vehicle, engine running, but Davis was standing outside the passenger door, and when he saw Tyson come out, he straightened up. The 2 men looked at each other across 30 feet of concrete. Tyson walked over, Not fast, not slow, just walked. He stopped in front of Davis. Davis put out his hand. Tyson took it. They held the handshake for a beat longer than normal. And then Davis said something that only Tyson heard. We only know about it because Tyson mentioned it years later in passing during a podcast, almost like he'd forgotten he wasn't supposed to share it. Davis said, "I spent my whole career thinking I was the hardest man in any room. You just taught me something about myself I needed to learn." And Tyson's response, the quiet power line that rang out across that empty parking lot. 7 words that captured everything about that night. "We all got something to learn, brother." That was it. No speech, no lecture, no victory lap. 7 words and a handshake in a parking lot in Las Vegas. Davis got in the SUV. The door closed, the vehicle pulled away, and Tyson stood there for a moment, alone under the parking lot lights, and rubbed his left hand with his right. The hand that had just reminded the world what it could do. The hand that was already swelling, because even Mike Tyson's fists pay a price when they hit something as hard as a human skull. If you made it to this point in the story and you're not subscribed, go ahead and hit that button. Because the stories on this channel are only getting better, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. Now let me tell you what happened after that night. The story spread through the SEAL community fast. Within a week, every team on the West Coast had heard some version of it. Within a month, it had reached the East Coast teams, the Army Special Forces guys at Bragg, even some Delta operators who generally don't acknowledge that anyone outside their unit is worth discussing. The details changed depending on who told it. In some versions, Tyson knocked out 3 SEALs. In others, Davis actually landed a punch first before Tyson put him down. In one version I heard, Tyson threw Davis through a plate glass window, which definitely did not happen. But the core of the story stayed the same in every telling. A SEAL thought he was tougher than Mike Tyson. He found out he was wrong. And then, instead of it ending in chaos and arrests and someone going to the hospital, the 2 men sat down and talked like human beings. That last part, the talking part, that's what made it legendary. Because violence stories are a dime a dozen in those communities. Everyone's got a fight story. Everyone's got a buddy who knocked someone out or got knocked out or broke someone's orbital bone in a parking lot outside a bar in Coronado. Those stories are common. What's not common is the story ending with mutual respect. What's not common is the punchline being grace. Davis apparently never challenged anyone to a fight again. His buddies said the experience changed something in him. Not his confidence, not his capability. He was still one of the most dangerous operators on his team. But the need to prove it, the compulsion to test himself against every hard man he encountered, that died on the floor of a Las Vegas nightclub. It died the way all false beliefs die, under the weight of a truth so sudden and so complete that there's no arguing with it. And Tyson went on being Tyson. He had more years of chaos ahead of him, more controversy, more headlines. But the people close to him say that 1998 was the beginning of the shift. Not the end of the old Tyson, but the first real glimpse of what was coming. The Tyson who would eventually get a one-man show on Broadway. The Tyson who would start a podcast and talk openly about his fears, his traumas, his mistakes. The Tyson who would cry on camera about Customato and not care who saw it. That Tyson was born in 100 different moments over many years. But one of those moments was a night in a Las Vegas club when he chose to kneel down next to a man instead of standing over him. You know what separates a fighter from a legend? A fighter wins. A legend knows what to do after the fight is over. A legend understands that the punch is the easy part. Anybody with fast hands and bad intentions can throw a punch. But choosing mercy when you've earned the right to cruelty, choosing connection when the whole room expects destruction, that's the part they can't teach you in any gym. That's the part that makes the story worth telling 25 years later. Davis is retired now. He left the teams with a full career behind him. And by all accounts, when he tells the story, and he still tells it, he doesn't tell it as the story of the time he got knocked out. He tells it as the story of the night he met Mike Tyson. He tells it with respect. He tells it with something that sounds a lot like gratitude, because some lessons you learn from books, some you learn from instructors, and some you learn from a left hook that rearranges your understanding of what a human being is capable of. That night in Las Vegas, a Navy SEAL laughed at Mike Tyson and told him to fight a real man. What happened next didn't just shock everyone in that room. It became the kind of story that changes shape depending on what you need to hear. If you need to hear about power, it's there. If you need to hear about humility, it's there. If you need to hear about two broken men finding something real in the wreckage of a stupid confrontation, that's there too. And somewhere in the desert night, under the neon and the stars, a fist swelled up and a jaw turned purple, and two men drove in opposite directions carrying the same memory, which was this: that the most dangerous man in the world is not the one who can knock you out. It's the one who can knock you out and then help you back to your feet. That's not a boxing lesson. That's a life lesson. And that, right there, is how legends are built.